Good. Okay, the recording has started. Welcome, everyone. This is our final class in this course called How to Live the Compassionate Life on Atisha's text. So let's go ahead and start with the prayers. Let me get those on the screen, and Jana's here. She will lead us in those. Just have to, whoops, I got to get them on the thing, do a screen share rather than just click on them. We'll see them here, but they won't see them at home. Okay, there they go. Let me get all this other stuff out of the way. Okay.
We'll start with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the
Founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
To the founder, the endowed, transcendent
Destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Short mandala offering, once in Tibetan. Saji fo ki
Juk Ching Me Tak Traham Ri Ra Ning Chi Ni De Gan Pa Di Sangye Jin Tu Me Tu Pa Ro Da Jing Cho Sho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayam.
Refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge
Until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyap Suchi Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Lola Penchir Sangye Dupar Sho Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyap Suchi Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penshir Sangye Drupar Sho. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. Let's just do a short meditation before we begin. So we're going to start with just a few minutes of watching the breath. This is just a way to calm our minds. And if you need a suggestion for how to work with the breath, you can tune into the sensation that occurs around the tip of the nose, where you feel the air coming in the nostrils and then going back out. And just making that your focal point, try to stay present there as best as you can. And whenever you see that the mind has wandered, then just guide the mind back to the breath. So again, just make sure you're in a good meditation posture, the back somewhat straight. You can close the eyelids partly if you want. But again, just work with the breath for the next few minutes, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection. So to set our motivation for tonight. Now let's set our motivation for being here tonight. Again, in this class, we're working with this advice from Lama Atisha on how we can live a more compassionate life, the life of a bodhisattva. So it is important that we generate the best motivation for engaging in these teachings. Can certainly start with some self-interest. Each of us is here out of a desire to have a happier life, to live more in harmony with others, to be of greater benefit to them in your own way. We want to go beyond just self-concern to this mind of bodhicitta that is dedicated to helping all beings, without exception, to achieve their greatest potential, to not just benefit them in a more temporal way, but to bring them to the state of Buddhahood, which will be the fulfillment of all of the potential that they have. So to set our motivation of bodhicitta, thought it might be useful to reflect on the fact that all beings have Buddha nature, and this is why bodhicitta makes complete sense. By Buddha nature, we mean that every being has a mind that can be developed into the state of Buddhahood. The potential is there. And right now we can see in our own minds that that potential is somewhat obscured by the minds of greed and jealousy and anger, miserliness, pride, ignorance. All these afflictions that the Buddha said are getting in the way of that potential being fully actualized. All of these obscurations in our mind can be removed, though. They don't exist in the nature of our mind. So we can remove our anger, our ignorance, our greed and desire. All of these things can be completely removed because they're not in the true nature of our minds. Our minds are fundamentally clear and pure. And of course, when we think about this in regard to ourselves, this is why you yourself can become a Buddha. It's because you have that potential, the ability to transform your own mind into that fully purified state. Moreover, every single sentient being has that same potential. So you can help them to achieve it by becoming a Buddha yourself. And this is the mind of bodhicitta that aspires to become a Buddha ourselves, so we then can help others perfectly. Because once we've removed our own obscurations, developed our own qualities to a limitless degree, we will then be able to help all sentient beings exactly in accord with how they need to be helped. And can do this spontaneously, effortlessly, in the state of Buddhahood. So again, whatever your understanding of that concept of Buddha nature and the state of Buddhahood that we can achieve, bring that to mind and let that be your motivation for being here tonight, to actualize your own Buddha nature so you can then help all other beings to do the same. In this way, everything we do tonight together here will become the cause to help all beings to attain complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. Open your eyes fully and we'll start the class. So again, we've been working with this meditation or this text that is covering all of the topics of kind of different practices that the Bodhisattva engages in. Again, the Bodhisattva is a being who has a mind that is intent upon benefiting others. Thank you, Jana, for putting those on. It's starting to get a little dark, but so again, the text that we're using, that you all have copies of, again online, you would have access to it at that one website. But I will be putting the verses online. But this is a text that goes back about 1,000 years. And Lama Atisha came to Tibet from India about 1,000 years ago, and this was one text that he had composed. And it's, of course, based on all the teachings that he had acquired from his masters who gave all the instruction about how to attain Buddhahood and how to practice like a bodhisattva. So what we have on the screen then is our final kind of the set of slides that we're going to go through that include the text. So as I mentioned before the class, we're going to start with verse 20. We finished verse 19 2 weeks ago. We didn't have class because I was leading a retreat last week, but let's go ahead and look at this verse, verse 20. To help soothe others' minds, forsake all disputation, and be endowed with forbearance. This again, translation by Thupten Jinpa. Sometimes the other translations are a little bit easier on the ears, but disputation, of course, is any sort of kind of argument, contention that we have with others, not being in agreement with others, and then to try to be endowed with patience instead, patience and forbearance. This is one of the perfections of a bodhisattva, to have a mind that is remaining undisturbed in the face of whatever harm or conflict that we might be involved in with others, which is something, of course, in our day and age we need a lot, right? There's the potential for a lot of argument, being in disagreement with others, sometimes online, sometimes in person, depending upon what's going on. But we need a lot of patience. We need a lot of ability to be able to just kind of be with them in a place of not allowing our minds to get to a place where we're angry or upset at the things that they're saying. Um, this is again the course we're going to have after the next week. We'll do that single session on developing the peaceful heart. That is in a way it's sort of a one-off that introduces what we're going to be working with over the Thursdays in April. But in April we're going to work with how do we cultivate the mind of patience in relation to various things that go on and the techniques that the Buddha taught. But of course, one of the things that we can see is that if we don't get into arguments with people, then we don't have to worry about it so much. What's being said in the first part of it is, if we can forsake all of these kind of contention, arguments, disputes with others, well, then we don't have any problems. And of course, being in an argument is usually up to us. Someone else may want to get in an argument, but we don't have to get in an argument with them. I'm going to share a little bit from the commentary that Alex Berzin gave on this verse. It says here, we try to please others to make them happy and to not contradict them. That's what contention means, to contradict somebody and to argue with them. So Kappa said it very nicely. If you agree with the other person, that ends the argument. We just agree. No, I agree with you. I'm not going to argue with you. Then it's finished. Now, again, there's going to be an exception he's going to talk about a little bit later, but there is oftentimes this room for us to simply agree and to not make a big deal out of it. I'll read a little story that Ajahn Brahm shared in one of his books. Whoops. There was this other verse that comes from the 8 Verses of Thought Transformation. This is another mind training text, as is Atisha's. This came after Atisha's, maybe about, I don't know, 50 years or so, maybe after Atisha's text. And there's that wonderful verse of the 8 verses, verse 5. When out of envy others mistreat me with insults, abuse, and the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. Why do we get so caught up in needing to be the victor? Why do we need to be the one that's right? Why do we need to make sure that everybody accords with what we think and what we feel about things? This is, again, something that we're going to try to get a little bit looser about by being aware of the fact that, again, an argument is up to us. Some people may want to argue with us. They'd be happy to argue with us all day. But nonetheless, it's our choice as to whether we want to do that or not. I'm going to share a little story. Again, this is in this wonderful book called Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung? Which is kind of like if you end up with a truckload of dung like piled on your front yard, you might say, who ordered it? And the idea is that with karma, you may have ordered it yourself. It's just you placed the order so long ago that you don't remember. But anyway, this is a little story in here called The Chicken and the Duck. So it's story time. You can get in your jammies and sit and I'll read to you. And this was apparently a favorite story of Ajahn Brahm's teacher, Ajahn Chah, who was from northeast Thailand. So a newly married couple went for a walk together in a wood one fine summer's evening after dinner. Now I'm going to use gender neutral terms for this so you can be whatever type of married couple you wish. They were having such a wonderful time being together until they heard a sound in the distance. Quack, 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 quack. Listen, said the one, that must be a chicken. No, no, that was a duck, said the other. No, I'm sure that was a chicken, said the one. Impossible. Chickens go cock-a-doodle-doo. Ducks go quack, quack. That's a duck, darling. And then the other one said with the first signs of irritation. Quack, quack, it went again. See, it's a duck, the other one said. No, dear, that's a chicken. I'm positive, the first one asserted, digging in their heels. Listen, that is a duck. D-U-C-K, duck. Got it? They said angrily. But it's a chicken, they protested. It's a friggin' duck. You. And it went whack, whack again before he said something he oughtn't. The one was almost in tears. But it's a chicken. The other one saw the tears welling up in their partner's eyes, and at last remembered why they had married that person. Their face softened, and they said gently, sorry, darling, I think you must be right. That is a chicken. Oh, thank you, darling, they said, and squeezed his hand. Quack, quack came the sound through the woods as they continued their walk together in love. So I use that phrase sometimes. That's a chicken and duck kind of thing. Like when you do have things that happen in your life and they don't really matter that much, like whether it's a duck or a chicken, even if you're absolutely convinced it's a duck, who cares? It's not going to be the end of the world. And as I said, I'm going to share a screen in a moment. where he says, if we do have some things that really do matter, I mean, like somebody's saying the light's green and it's red, well, then you tell them, no, it's red. You don't kind of get into, a safety issue. If there's something that really needs to be corrected, well, that's a different story. But in a lot of cases, we have chicken and duck kind of stuff going on, where we're just getting in the argument for the sake of proving ourselves right. And it doesn't really matter in the end whether it was a chicken or a duck, right? So anyway, that's a phrase you can use now with whoever you want to use it with. So let me share a little bit of what Alex says, and that kind of carries on this idea again of there are times when, of course, we have to, disagree with people. There are certain limits, though, he says. If a person is going to do something destructive, we have to set our limits. If somebody says, let's go out and shoot kangaroos, I don't think that's going to happen here in Taos, but, we set a limit. We say, no, we don't agree to that. However, if they say the sky is green and we say, no, it's blue, there's no point going on arguing. Who cares? So that's kind of another chicken and duck thing, whether the sky is green or blue. He says this is relevant, especially when there is a political or religious argument and the other person absolutely will not listen to anything we say. What's the point? Then it becomes idle chatter to just go on and on. So we just say, okay, let's talk about something else, then it's finished. And why I'm sharing Alex's commentary on this one is because this is, something that's really applicable to the time that we live in. There's a lot of political divisiveness, a lot of people who will be happy to get into an argument over their side of the fence and what they believe about it, and other people, we might be on that other side of the fence and we're trying to defend ourselves in the midst of that. So we obviously have a lot of things where we can get into a lot of argumentation with people, and it really comes down to us. Do we really want to engage in that? And if it's just going to go on, if you know that the person's not somebody who's going to really want to engage in it from the point of view of maybe revisiting their points of view and their opinions, then maybe it's not so good to get into that. It's only hardening everyone's view, and we're just banging heads together all the time. It just becomes a waste of time and a waste of speech, waste of energy. So I don't know. I mean, that's something that I think is good advice in general, if we can avoid those sorts of things. Now, I mean, there may be times when somebody is open to hearing something different, when, obviously it'd be good if there was more conversation between people. Look at the times we live in. A lot of people aren't talking to each other. Like the holidays after the last year's election must have been really tough for a lot of people when they went home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or whatever holidays people were celebrating. And suddenly the people at the table, they realized had voted differently than them, and people had to deal with that. If there is an opportunity to engage in helpful, beneficial conversation with somebody, by all means do it. But again, it's just really not good to get into arguments with people. As I said, a lot of these things start sounding like, I don't know, just good manners. Going to be a quote from Alex Person too, where he references Miss Manners. Remember the column Miss Manners that would give all sorts of advice about how to be civil with other people and what have you. But I think there is something to be said for this. If you are living a life where you're dedicated to this principle of ahimsa is the principle of nonviolence, that essentially we don't want to be harming other beings through anything that we do. And of course, can take it to extremes. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche would always say, we can't be in this world without being complicit in some harm to other beings. But the idea is to not intentionally harm other beings, harming them through our physical actions, harming them through our words. I want to try to refrain from those sorts of things as much as possible. So again, this is what the Bodhisattva behavior is all based on. When we talk about living this life dedicated to helping all beings, well, then obviously it starts in the moment. And we don't wait till some other time. We just stop harming beings now. And then that plays out in terms of our morality, our behavior, and eventually we will be able to help them, not just, refrain from harming them. That's the Bodhisattva ideal as well, is to not just, say, I won't harm you. I'm not going to kill you, Mr. Mosquito, but rather maybe I can help the mosquito, give him a little bit of blood before he flies away or what have you. So again, this first verse that we're looking at tonight is really all about avoiding these kinds of arguments that are really not going to be very fruitful. Again, it makes a lot of sense. Let's see, where did I have that then? It's weird, I'm not seeing it. There it is. Oh yeah, that's what it is. Okay, you should have the next verse on the screen. Let me put it there now. Oh yes, Mary Jo, sorry, let's do that before we go on to verse 21. Yes.
I have one of my very good friends' wife died recently,
Oh, sorry.
and And of course, that's a very difficult time, and
Sure.
I had talked with, I visited them several times when she was nearing the end of her life, and then he had called me to tell me that she had died and so forth, and
Mhm,
I offered if I could help,
mhm,
I was happy to, but he didn't need help, and so anyway, I called him up, maybe, possibly a week later, and uh, he was offended by something that I said, but
mhm,
I think it was because he's so fragile right now.
yeah,
That's what I think. And I thought about it, that night, and then the next day, and I didn't try to go on with any
Mhm,
kind of
mhm.
conversation. I just thought it was best to, just not say more.
Right.
And, I haven't called them up to check on him and their little daughter or anything. And well, their little daughter, she's in her 30s, but she's developmentally disabled, so
Wow.
she's young
Wow.
in a lot of ways
Mhm,
and definitely has special needs.
mhm,
And I'm thinking especially about her, missing her mom and stuff. Anyway, I've decided that I don't really know what I can say that's beneficial, so
mhm,
I'm not gonna call him,
Mhm.
at least not for a
Mhm.
while.
mhm.
I just feel like it's too
Right.
fragile a
Right.
situation, and
Mhm,
I don't know how to be beneficial,
right.
basically. And maybe I do it better with my thoughts.
That can be so. I mean, yeah, I think you have to be the one who assesses that in terms of your relationship with him and this interaction that you had and what might be the wisest thing. And sometimes it is good to give people some space, certainly in that period of initial grief and what have you.
Yeah.
Things are very tender and very difficult. So, but maybe, yeah, just to, if you can, occasionally just say, check in to see if you need anything. Maybe that's all you need to say is just to let him know, remind him that you're there if he does need anything. Because, yeah, you may not be able to do more than that. Because maybe when you do start talking about things, he may have,
Yeah.
be in a difficult place to hear anything.
And even
Yeah.
food in the past, I had found that was something I could do. I might not be able to
Mhm.
go and visit, but I could take some food. And that seemed to be usually well received.
Good, good.
So anyway, then after she died, the next day I took over some cornbread I had made. They eat very simply,
Mhm.
into rice mostly.
Mhm.
So anyway, uh, he, he told me, he had the pan ready to give it back to me, and
Mhm.
I said, did you like the cornbread? I put some chili in it. I thought that would be good. A little bit of cheese. And he said, well, it wasn't really to my liking. And,
Mhm.
I feel that he's in this stage almost like, gotta
Mhm.
say no,
Right, right.
no, no, no.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want that, no. And so
Yeah.
I thought in some ways it's good to give him the opportunity to say no.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of hard on me because I don't
Understood.
know what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
So,
And that's where it is good, maybe just to give the benefit of the doubt to him and let, him,
yes,
if that's the place that he's in, because it is, again, a tough time grieving. And sometimes the things that you might normally enjoy aren't enjoyable because of the
Yeah.
grief you're going through. So it may, on another occasion, he would have been fine and would have,
yes,
so you just can't look at it as it being about you as much as it is where he is at and,
yes.
the sensitivity that's there. So,
And not,
yeah.
again,
Um,
he shouldn't be needing his approval, I have to really watch that little
mhm.
scenario.
Yeah.
And, but the other thing too was,
Yeah.
excuse me, I'm going on and on,
That's
but,
all right.
um,
You got some time.
it just, seems to me that sometimes people do just have to be rascally and just say, kind of like, no, I don't want your help. get out of here. I can do it myself.
Right.
You know, I felt kind of like he would like
Mhm,
to have said that.
mhm.
And I know him well enough to know that he does say things like that. And
Yeah.
so anyway,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Mhm.
hard to know, but sometimes maybe it's better to be quiet. I don't know.
Yeah, and like you said, just to hold him in your thoughts, and that's maybe good enough, to be able to send him whatever warm thoughts that you can. Certainly not block him from your heart, and I know you're not doing that, but just to keep
Yes.
your heart open to him,
Yeah.
that may be beneficial in its own way. And then it may come back around at some point when things are different. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Mary Jo. I'm sorry you're going through that because that
I'm
is tough.
sorry to take so much time with it, but it's just right
Yeah,
there. I've been
I
dealing with
understand.
it and I've really been just sort of puzzling over it and,
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
this and that. And
yeah.
so thank you for giving
Sure,
me
sure,
this
sure.
space.
No, I'm glad that you were able to share that. Let's go ahead and look at the next verse. Again, verse 21. I think that should come up now. This one's kind of interesting. Be free of flattery and fickleness in friendship. Lots of F's in that one. Be steadfast and reliable at all times. Do not disparage others, but always abide with respectful demeanor. Again, I think this one is pretty clear in many ways because we know what this is like. Maybe we've been that to others where we are flattering them so that we kind of gain their friendship, and then when they stop doing things for us, then we maybe have nothing more to do with them. Or being fickle in our friendship, what they call like good weather friends, right? Where you're there when everything's fine, but when things go south and people really need you, then you want nothing to do with them. Those are the sorts of friends that we know from our own experience that we don't like having in our lives, and we wouldn't want to be that type of friend to others. Again, this one does seem a little bit more like Miss Manners than it does Lama Atisha, but nonetheless, I think these things are important. We do have relationships that we need to keep in harmony with those around us. So we should have good friendships with others where we do take care of others, we reciprocate when they're kind to us, and so on. Be steadfast and reliable at all times. This is also a quality that we like in people. People who are pretty constant and steadfast, that you don't have to, come to them one time and they're one way and another time they're a whole nother way. We just want to be there as a reliable, steady friend and companion to others. And then, of course, do not disparage others, but always abide with respectful demeanor. These are just, again, how we have people in our lives that uh, are happy to be in our lives rather than if we're disparaging them. And we shouldn't disparage them to their face, obviously, but even don't disparage them to others. If there's somebody who matters in your life, you shouldn't be talking about them to other people, saying negative things about them, belittling them, or what have you. Instead, we should have respect for our friends and the people that we feel close to.
What if they don't matter to you?
Then I think we still should be careful because we might end up just engaging in a lot of, meaningless talk and gossip. And there is that very first Bodhisattva vow, and some of you in the room have taken the Bodhisattva vows, and the first one is the first downfall that we have to avoid is praising oneself and belittling others out of attachment. And of course, attachment can be attachment to anything, attachment to just being liked by others. So we start engaging in, belittling other people. And that doesn't have to be done to someone's face. But I think it's a tricky thing. Once more, we're living in times where people do this very easily. They do it online, they do it to each other, putting down people, and of course, whether they be political figures or whether they be people who are in your life in a more direct way, it's not a good habit to get into because, I mean, and again, His Holiness is always really, I've mentioned this before, always very keen on saying we have to separate the person from their action. We can be in opposition to the actions of many people in this world because those actions are not good. They are causing harm to other people, other beings. But in terms of the person, we want to be holding them as compassionately as we can. And this course is called How to Live the Compassionate Life. Compassion is at the root of bodhicitta. It's that genuine concern for the suffering of others. So why would we want to be complicit in the suffering of others by talking about them negatively, by doing things that are putting them down? Once more, you can protest and make whatever efforts you can to curtail behavior that you think is not beneficial. That's compassion in action, right? Doing what we can to stop those things that are going on in our world that are causing harm to other beings, whether they be halfway around the world or whether they be here in our own country. But protesting those and doing things we can to oppose those doesn't mean that we hate the people who do those actions. They're doing those
Doesn't
actions.
mean what?
It doesn't mean that we hate the people who do those actions and we disparage them, say negative things about them, right? Because they're sentient beings just like us that have crazy minds. Unfortunately, their minds may be a little crazier than ours at times, but we know what it's like to have a crazy mind, to have a mind that, gets very selfish or gets very impatient or what have you. So again, I think we have to be kind of treating the person as compassionately as we can while still opposing the actions of those people. So
usually those cases are people who, well, politicians who do cruel things,
mhm.
or they have to recognize the state of the ego mind identification.
Yeah, I mean, if ideally,
Understand it that way.
yeah. So again, if we talk about the ego mind or the what we call the self-grasping, that fact that everything is rotating around their own kind of solid sense of an I, and they're behaving in accord with that to try to protect that and protect what they feel is kind of an extension of that, their concerns, their family, what have you. Well, then we understand why they're doing it. It doesn't make it okay that they're doing it, but we have a different view. Yeah. So this is definitely, I mean, that's the Buddhist view, is that everything's revolving around that solid sense of an I, an ego, that we are then relating to the world from that distortion. And so if that's happening for us, and we can acknowledge that, in our own way, that is what is the root of our behavior, well, then it's definitely happening with people who are politicians or who are involved in other things in the world, doing the acts they do. Bombing Gaza, after the ceasefire, all of these things, to go back to these patterns again and again. It's because their mind is obscured in that way and really latching onto that ego and anything that, again, is kind of an extension of it, which can be my country, my family, my people, whatever. So this is, how it's all happening. Thanks for that, Ed. Yeah. So let's go on to the next verse. I don't know that there's too much more that I need to say. I mean, there might be a slide or two. I think there is in regard to something from Alex. Yeah, I do like Alex Berzin's commentary. I had teachings from him before. He's a longtime student of Tibetan Buddhism. It says, what do we do when people come to us just to exploit us? People who just want to get something from us and who, when they no longer find us useful, go away. Well, first of all, if we're practicing as bodhisattvas, we are happy if they come to us. We are happy if we can help them. If they go away, well, that's their loss. That's their loss. And it's sad that they are no longer open to our help. That bodhisattva wants to help anybody. Even Lama Zopa Rinpoche would say, and it says they're useful. Rinpoche would often say that the bodhisattvas want to be used. We have this kind of phrase, being used is really a bad thing in our culture, right? Being used, like that's such a negative thing. But if we think about being useful, it's not that different, right? You're just adding 3 letters to it. Being useful means that you, of course, are going to be used by them, but in a way that benefits them. They will be able to get what they need by your help, by your being there for them. And Rinpoche went on to say that this is what bodhisattvas want, is to be used. Even make those prayers. There's some wonderful prayers in Master Shantideva's text, which again was a precursor to this text by Atisha, where he says, may I be a guide for those who are guideless, a leader for those who are entering the path, a ship, a boat, and a bridge for all who wish to cross over water. May I become a beautiful garden for those who seek a garden, light for those who look for light, bedding for those who wish to rest, and a servant for all who want me as their servant. I mean, that's the kind of prayers bodhisattvas make, right? They want to be things that will be useful to others. They want to be as necessary as having a nice comfy bed to lay in or whatever the case might be. So this, again, is something that Alex is saying, this is really how we should be. We're kind of open for business whenever anybody needs help. And if they don't want to be helped by us, well, just have to acknowledge that that's the case at times. Then he says, now in regard to exploitation, we give what's appropriate. We don't overgive, which could be harmful to them and to us. We don't let them be a complete drain on us. We set limits. I mean, I think this is true. You do have to kind of be careful in terms of being exploited by others because you don't want them to engage in a negative pattern and have detrimental effects to them. Yeah. This is one of the things too, is like when we will have times where perhaps we do need to do something to stop the behavior of others who are harming us even, though mainly we are often more concerned if they're harming other beings. But that's because we don't want them to engage in that harm, not just those beings to be harmed. You know, the Buddhist perspective is not one where we see only the compassion for the victims and not for the perpetrators. The perpetrators are the ones that are creating that negative karma that they're going to have to experience further down the road. The victims created in the past, and that is why they are being harmed at that time. You know, we can have compassion for them as well, but we should also have compassion for the perpetrator because they are engaging in actions that are going to produce suffering for them, you know, later in this life or in another life. So this is what His Holiness always presents it, is we have to have that complete compassion that takes in every being. And we can put an end to actions on that basis then. Again, not in violent ways, hopefully find non-violent ways to stop this, but to say, okay, this has got to cease because not only are you harming these beings, but you yourself are being harmed by your actions. And according to the principle of karma, which is really key in all of these teachings, you know, we are the creators of our own experiences. So let's look at I think there may be one more screen from Alex. I don't remember. Yeah, he quotes Ringo Tupel, who we had in the teaching 2 weeks ago, who came to Berlin, he said once, and he got some advice from him. But it says here, as Ringo Tupel said very nicely, so many people might ask us for things, but there are only so many requests that we can fulfill. We can't multiply ourselves into a million forms at the same time. We're not yet Buddhas, and Buddhas can do this. They say Buddhas can emanate in as many ways as possible to benefit others. He goes on to say, nonetheless, we at least try to give them something, a little something, so that we're not totally rejecting them. And I think this is good. I mean, even if you can't help somebody in the moment, maybe you're out and you don't have any money on you and someone asks you for money, you can at least wish them well or hold positive thoughts towards them or do something, If you can give them something, that's great. If you can, help them out at that time. Now, there may be those, again, who are coming to you and it's obvious that based on information you have, it's maybe not good to help them because they might harm themselves through what you're going to give them. But generally, we don't have that kind of wisdom, right? So we should always want to give, always want to help. But nonetheless, if there's, a situation where we can't, then at least help by sending good thoughts, wishing people well, doing whatever you can on that front. Okay. See if there's any more for this. Yeah, when it comes, this is the mismanners part. I like this. This is why I'm sharing this one in particular, because I think he makes a good point here. He says, when it comes to telling someone we can't do something, I'm reminded of a lovely line from Miss Manners. Miss Manners, he was telling the people there, I think he was teaching in Berlin. Miss Manners is an American newspaper's etiquette queen, of whom one asks questions about etiquette. Miss Manners, Miss Good Manners, says that in such situations, we just say, I'm so sorry. We don't give excuses. We don't give reasons why we can't help. We just say, oh, I'm so sorry. I won't be able to do that. We don't explain. If we were to explain, they just give us an argument about it. And then we'd have to get defensive. We just say, I'm so sorry. Great guru, Miss Manners. I mean, there's a point to this. I find often I get into too much of explaining people why I can't do something. It's like somebody says, oh, can you do, like, oh, I can't do that. And you feel like you have to add more to it, right? And there's nothing wrong with stopping right there saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't do that. Is there another time we could do something, or is something else I could do for you, or whatever? I mean, go right on to something else rather than trying to make up, well, not make up, certainly, to give them the whole story, give them the whole list of why you can't do it because of what's going on. Because people will challenge it often. Well, you can still make some time for me, right? Or you can still find something that you can, give to me or whatever. So there's something to be said for that it's really quite useful if we just stop it. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you. That's not something that I can do at this point. Any questions on that or comments on that verse about friendship and disparaging others? Rachel? Yeah.
I have two comments. First one is just a little response to what you said. And I'll say sometimes less is best. I have a friend that always used to say that kind of thing.
Less is best, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
And, you know, I guess it kind of fits in anyway. I had this on my mind too, a long time. Since last week when I was up here, there was some young man in the parking lot with a little sign that said he was struggling and
Mhm.
needed money for food and home, and he didn't have a home, and he didn't have a job and so forth. And I had already decided I would give him a little bit of money. And then I got closer and I don't, somehow that struggling kind of caught me, and I thought, yes, you know, we all struggle. And
Mhm.
so anyway, I gave him just a little bit of money, and then I went on, and then I had to go back past him, and I thought I would tell him about the Hanuman temple, because they
Yeah,
have food
meals, yeah,
quite
yeah,
a bit of
yeah.
the time, not every day. But I asked him if he knew about the Hanuman temple, because they often had food, and he said yes. And then I saw he's got this cigarette in his hand, in his fingers, and somehow I just went into judgment, you know,
Mhm, yeah.
from not even observing, but I really had an opinion about it.
Mhm.
And I have a very strong opinion. And so that really was hard for me to see.
Mhm.
And I thought, you know, how can I work with that? I mean,
Mm.
you know,
Right.
it's like practice, yes, but how can I do better with that?
Mhm.
Because I think it's there in many other little situations. I think it's there.
Right.
You know, the ego stuff where somehow
Mhm.
I feel better than, and I feel that they're less good than, you know,
Right, right.
and it's
Mhm.
very upsetting to see that so clearly. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know.
Mhm.
I thought, it seems like, maybe you have ideas of how to work with that.
Yeah, I mean, in brief, you know, when we're dealing with that type of situation where we've given money and then you see someone has used that money or is using that money to smoke cigarettes or to drink alcohol or do any of these sorts of things that maybe we feel we're above that or better than that. That's not something we would do. And maybe there is that little bit of discontentment that they're not using our money for something that's more practical, perhaps, and not harmful to them. But I think we have to give people, again, the few comforts that people have often, you know, who are we to judge when we're looking at people and they decide to spend their money that way, or they decide to
Yeah.
take on those habits and they are not ready to break them because of, again, the few comforts perhaps that they do have in their life right now. I always feel like once I've given the money, then it really is theirs, it's their volition as to how they want to spend it. Karmically, you're not involved if you're not buying them for that person. I mean, they're choosing once you give them money. There's that side of it. But that whole side that you're looking at of kind of seeing your own prideful mind that's looking down and seeing yourself as superior to those who are doing this, I think that's a good lesson to just say, okay, we still all have that. And that's where, again, we want to try to give to others from the most genuine place, not give out of pity, certainly, and also not give out of guilt, you know, to really give genuinely and say, here, this is what I want you to have. And let them make the decision. If it is money, I know a lot of people walk around with food because they don't feel comfortable giving money, but then you are taking that volition away from that person. And some people will not accept food because maybe they get the free food at the Hanuman temple and they don't have, you know, any need for food. So I don't know. It's a complex issue. But watching our own minds, like you're talking about, and seeing when these things come up and some level of judgment, judgment is again something that is kind of antithetical to what we're doing. If anything, it should be more compassion that we should have for others
Yes.
when we see them engaged in some of these behaviors that again are possibly going to harm them over time, you know, may harm them in very serious ways. But that's the nature of human beings. I mean, we do stuff that harms ourselves in many ways by following our own crazy behavior and action. So I think we, have to kind of bring ourselves down to their level and say, yeah, we're kind of all in the same ballpark. Does that make some sense? I don't know.
I was able to get to compassion like the next day,
Good, good, good.
but
Yeah,
it wasn't immediate
yeah, yeah.
for sure.
That's okay. I mean, that's how it happens sometimes. We're not there at the moment, but we'll get there eventually. Thank you for sharing that, Mary Jo. I know these things happen to all of us. I'm glad that you're putting a voice to many of the things that we all have to experience as well. We have the next two lines on verse 22. When giving advice, maintain compassion and altruism. Okay, so we're just talking about compassion. And here, the idea is that whenever we're giving advice to another, we want to be as compassionate as possible, which means listening to what they have to say, seeing them as a suffering sentient being, and trying to give from that place. If we're going to advise people, again, first of all, if we're asked for advice, don't just give advice to people simply because you think you know better, because most people are not open to receiving advice. So you might ask them first. If you do really feel like there's something you want to give out of your compassion, then, say, well, I have something I'd like to share with you that might be some advice for you, but are you open to receiving that? Is that something that I could say? And then if they give you permission, then by all means, do that. But make sure it's grounded in compassion. Make sure it's grounded in this altruistic attitude, really wanting to benefit others, really wanting to help them to address what's causing their suffering. And we might be able to see it a little more clearly. Again, I'm not saying Buddhism has a monopoly on any of this, but Buddhism is certainly using the tools of being able to know our own minds to be able to look at the minds of others to some degree. Can't always tell what's going on in their minds, but we might have some advice based on the fact that we've been in the same position before. We know what it's like, and we might need to, come from that place of trying to really genuinely help somebody, so they don't have to go through the hard lessons that we went through, perhaps. So I don't know. This one's pretty simple. I don't really want to talk too much about it, but there's one little bit from Lama Gyurme. Again, I've quoted from this book before. This is a more recent commentary on this text. Giving advice or offering guidance or even teaching should not be motivated by ulterior motives. That he's just pointing that out. In the previous slide, again, in the verse, it said, make sure it's out of compassion or altruism. But we should never have, this ulterior motive. He says it should not be driven by the desire to gain followers or any other personal gain. Your intention should be rooted in compassion and the genuine wish to aid others. Your aim should be to alleviate their ignorance regarding the Dharma and impart wisdom to them. All right, so with such thoughts in mind, now you should provide instructions or guided advice. Whenever you have the ability or opportunity, do so with compassion and a genuine desire to help. It doesn't matter whether the person has offered you something or not, whether you are seeking praise or fame. These concerns should not play a role. Again, those are the worldly concerns. We talked about them previously. To be praised or to have material gain from our interactions with others or whatever. This is not why we would want to give any sort of Dharma advice to anyone. Your sole concern, he says, should be the well-being of that individual. How can you help them? How can you impart wisdom to them? How can you eliminate their ignorance? Now, again, this sounds pretty lofty, and Lama Gyurme probably has the ability to do all of that, pretty highly esteemed Lama. But nonetheless, at whatever level we're at in our own learning about Buddhism, if there is an opening with someone who we feel we can impart some level of Dharma instruction to, as I said, if there's they say they're willing to hear what we have to say in terms of advice about how to look at something that happened to them that they're really angry about or upset about or what have you. Well, then by all means, we should be sharing that, but doing it once more, not as out of our pride of what we know, not out of, a desire for them to help us in some way or give us some kind of money, or certainly not to, have them praise us at the end and say, oh, you're so wise, how wonderful, da, 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 da. We're just imparting what we know. This is what is called the generosity of Dharma. I think we talked about generosity before because there was a verse earlier that had to do with giving. In traditional Buddhism, when we talk about the Bodhisattva's practice of generosity, it starts with material giving, giving the money like you did, Mary Jo, to this young man. Then it becomes also giving protection, which you actually did by telling him about the Hanuman temple, making sure that he knew that there was a way to get food to protect him from being hungry on the streets or whatever, that he can go there. The third one is to give Dharma. And they say that that's the best giving because of course you're helping others by giving instruction that will have longer term effects than just the moment. It's fine to give money that they can use in the moment, and fine to give some level of protection from some harm they might have to experience in the moment. But if you give them Dharma, then you're protecting them from future harm further down the way. They begin to start working with their minds, looking at their thoughts, changing their behavior on the basis of that. So all of this comes about when we are willing to engage with others from that perspective of how can we help. Again, we can't help everybody. We talked about that in one of the earlier classes too, I think. Because not everybody's willing to be helped, nor is everyone necessarily going to listen to what we have to say. We might be able to share it with them, and if we share it with them and they say, "Oh, that sounds really stupid, I would never do that," well then, that's their choice. Don't get angry, upset at them. Again, don't get prideful or judge them or anything. Just acknowledge that at this time, that's a teaching that this person's not really open to receiving, and that's okay. So we all can be teachers. I mean, it's not just people like me who've been, in our organization. I'm a registered teacher. It means I've done certain education and what have you and can sit up here and do this. But we're all teachers in our own way. We even just teach by example, by how we are in the world. The example of giving money to people who ask for it on the street. When there's a lot of people who will pass them by, a lot of people in cars, when they see people with their little cardboard signs that just, go right past them and don't give anything. It's kind of nice to teach by example too, to just kind of make sure that we live according to the principles we're trying to practice. So let's go on to our next verse.
It
sorry.
just
Yes,
reminds
Sarah,
me, I
please,
had
yeah.
a friend who did a nice thing, and
good.
she was living in the Northeast where there were a lot of toll roads,
Mhm.
and she would often pay the toll for the car behind her.
Yeah, that's great. I've heard of some people doing that with coffees at like Starbucks or somewhere or any
Mm-hmm.
coffee shop. You say, "Oh, and by the way, pay for another coffee for whoever comes after me." That's a nice thing to do, right? Yeah. I mean, you're just helping people who are, again, strangers to you, but it's sort of paying it forward in a sense. Maybe they come in and say, "Oh, well, then I'll pay for the next person," and whatever. And you get involved in a whole chain of of paying people. Paying for people's coffee or tolls or whatever. Yeah, these are good ideas, nice things. Random acts of kindness, they often say, right? Why not? Nice ways to kind of be in the world, just doing things.
That's,
Uh-huh.
even, I mean, money like that, paying for the one behind, that's so
Mhm.
great. At the Hanuman temple again, I was there and there was this lady with a boy, and they were ahead of me, and they gave me a plate, in this line. And I thought, oh, that's really nice, usually I just pick up my plate.
Mhm.
And then that they were serving my plate.
Oh, wow.
They served my plate as we went along this line.
Uh,
And it was such a rare thing. It's like, I thought, oh my goodness,
Mhm.
they're doing that to me. It
Mhm.
was very interesting how that was. And I
Wonderful.
realized I could do that too, You don't have to be behind the table to be serving somebody.
Yeah.
And it was just an interesting shift of everything.
Yeah, wonderful. How sweet. How nice.
It was very
People
sweet.
just to be kind like that. That's what we need more of in this world, frankly. I mean, just people being kind. When I was traveling on Tuesday, coming back from this teaching tour in California, the weather was nuts here, right? Tuesday, remember all the dust and stuff. And of course, Albuquerque, there were no planes going in or going out, apparently. And so I was just, trying to be just friendly with everyone who I met, because there's nothing you could do about it. It wasn't like, Southwest ruined everything by doing this or that. It was just the weather, right? So, and I find like people, they're really receptive when you're just kind of kind and, try to find out what's going on with them or whatever. I don't know. I think there is that we really need to be much more open to just being with others in that space of just being somewhat interested and kind and wanting to do something for others. I don't know. Makes a difference. Everyone's on pins and needles these days anyway from everything else going on. Why not treat them nice here or there? So okay, now we get this little, we're introduced to this thing called the 10 spiritual deeds here. Never defame the teachings. Of course, this is, really standard Buddhist advice. We really don't want to, all of the teachings that the Buddha gave were appropriate for somebody. Not all of them are necessarily things we have to practice right now, or maybe things we practiced earlier that are not as important now, but the teachings themselves are really valuable. Then it says, whatever practices you admire, with aspiration and the 10 spiritual deeds, strive diligently with no distinction between day and night. You just try to put all of your effort into practicing the Dharma. If we do have practices that we admire, and certainly, I mean, from my perspective, Buddhism has a lot to admire. And that's why I've dedicated some 30 years of my life to this path, is because it feels like it resonates with me. And so when you find something that you admire and that you enjoy practicing, well, then that's something to put more energy into, right? And to really make sure that you take it to deeper level, to really incorporate that into your life. Now, these 10 spiritual deeds that are mentioned here, there's two different ways that they're presented. And I'm going to go through these rather quickly. There is a handout for the second one because it's outside of the realm of what many of you may have heard of before. The first is what are called the 6 perfections, and then there are 4 additional ones that are often put together for what are called the 10 perfections of a bodhisattva. So Alex said, or this is Geshe Ngawandarge. I think Alex did the translation for this when Geshe Ngawandarge taught this. This is from a book that I've been quoting here and there. As an awakening warrior, which is the phrase used for a bodhisattva, we should intensively follow the practices of the 10 transcendent perfections. The first 6 are the commonly known ones of generosity that I just mentioned. Ethical discipline means, of course, abiding in good morality, patience, enthusiastic effort, meditative stability, concentration, and then wisdom, intelligent awareness. These 6 we all know, I think most of us. The other 4 additional ones that are added to make 10 perfections are strength or power, prayers of aspiration for the path, or usually just called aspiration, skillful means. This is a unique thing we want to be able to do, is to be able to act skillfully with regard to others, exactly where they are, and try to work with them in that situation. And then primordial awareness, which is this deeper level of wisdom that can be generated by high-level bodhisattvas. So again, I'm not going to go into all of these, but we see traditionally they say that these 4 that are on the screen are an extension of the 6th one. They are a way of practicing wisdom in terms of allowing that wisdom to have power that we can then engage in what is beneficial, to motivate our aspirations, to allow us to have deeper insight into what's skillful to do, and then to develop this deeper state of wisdom. However, he says this aforementioned list is for those who are practices, It might be, I've got to check the English on that, and might have copied it incorrectly. Who are practices of the practitioners of the great vehicle. That's probably what it was supposed to be, the Mahayana. For those who do not engage actively in this path, there's another set of 10 general practices explained by Maitreya, the coming Buddha. What's interesting is these are also done in the Mahayana. It's not that they're unique to, the individual vehicle, the Hinayana. But these are the practices of one day, he says. And I don't think you could do all of these things in one day. You'd be doing a lot. But copying and writing out scriptures doesn't mean photocopying, by the way. It means like writing them out. This was a practice that was done in the days before they had mass production of texts and what have you. Making offerings to the 3 supreme jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Giving generously to the poor and sick. Listening to discourses on Dharma. This is always good to do if we can do that as part of each day, or at least read texts. The next one is reading scriptures to oneself and others, or reciting them. Taking to heart the essence of the teachings through meditation. Explaining the meaning of the Dharma to others, teaching in other words. Reciting the Heart Sutra or any of Buddha's sutras. Contemplating the meaning of the texts, and meditating single-pointedly on the meaning of the teachings. Thus, we should perform the 10 transcendent perfections or the 10 daily practices, thereby pointing all our actions in a skillful direction. I mean, if you can do all of these in a single day, I think that's pretty outstanding. But nonetheless, I'll share with you the little handout that I'm going to put out in the Google Drive where you can access it. It's just a little handout that is the text from Alex Berzin when he went into this. Let me get that on the screen. Oh, it's right there. Okay. So Alex Berzin says, to split my day, my days and nights doing these 10 Dharma acts, it doesn't mean that every day we have to do all 10 acts. Days and nights just means our time. So there's no distinction as to day or night. You just do it as often as you can. So we try to devote our time to the particular type of practice that suits us very well. What sorts of practices can we do? Well, there are 10 Dharma acts. And again, he goes into some description of these. I'm not going to read it all because you can read this. It'll be out there again. The same things pretty much that I had. Reciting sutras, I might just mention that this is really a very powerful practice. The Heart Sutra is really good to recite and even to memorize it eventually. It's not that long of a sutra. The last two pertain to the deeper wisdoms that we can develop by thinking about the teachings, meditating, reflecting on them, and then to meditate single-pointedly on them. These are the wisdom that arises from contemplating or thinking, and then the wisdom that arises from meditation. And of course, the previous to these two are the wisdom that arises from listening to teachings, which is what we're doing tonight, as well as, throughout our Dharma career of, going to various teachings with various masters and what have you. So he's essentially saying that, to go back to the initial verse, that if you have certain practices that you're feeling really complement where you're at, they resonate with you, they might be one of those, they could be certainly something on that list, well, then engage in those practices, practicing generosity, being very attentive to your morality, or practicing patience. All of these things in terms of those 10 perfections, but then also these 10 additional Dharma acts of reciting texts or, reading scriptures or whatever the case might be. Those are all useful things to do. Now, ideally, most of us should do at least a couple of these things each day if we have time, have some sort of a Dharma practice and a period of Dharma study every day. But that's really, again, something you can fit into your daily life. That's great. If you can't, then that's understandable, and just work on making sure you create the time at some point for that to be a part of your day. So now you might recall that I'm jumping here a little bit because I'm going to the version that James Apple uses, even though we're using Thupten Jinpa's translation. James B. Apple, he wrote the biography of Lama Atisha, and he did a translation of this, and there's a slightly different order of things. We did the first part of verse 26 some time ago. Remember, it had to do with those 7 gems, the Arya gems. Again, maybe it doesn't ring a bell for people, but it was many classes ago, four classes, maybe three classes ago, somewhere in there. So this is the last little bit of that verse, the last 2 lines of verse 26. It says, among others, guard your speech. When alone, guard your mind. This is actually one of the most famous passages from this text. Not that this text is that well known to begin with, but nonetheless, I like James Apple's translation of this, so I put it on there. Examine your speech while among the multitude. Examine your mind while in solitude. I like the kind of rhyming of that in a sense. But this is really true. I mean, we do have, when we are with others, the most important thing is to guard our speech. Sure, don't punch them either. Refrain from doing physical actions that harm them. But we are mostly engaged with others through our speech, right? Talking to them, getting to know them, getting into arguments with them or whatever the case might be. We need to guard our speech when we're with others. Doesn't mean that you don't pay any attention to your mind, because your mind is always behind your speech. It's telling, your mouth how to move and what words to form and what have you. So there's definitely an element of mind involved here. But the idea is that we should be meticulous and really careful with the things we say when we're with others. Remember when we talked about speech early on, there was a phrase from, this is something Eric Kolvik, who's a teacher in the insight meditation tradition, Vipassana tradition. He said this in one of his teachings, and I really like it, so credit to him. But he says essentially when we get ready to speak, we should ask ourselves 2 things. What am I going to say, and why am I going to say it? Or what am I saying, and why am I saying it? I mean, if you first start with what's the content? Like, what are the words I'm about ready to throw out of my mouth at this person? And be clear about that first. But most importantly, really, is what is my purpose for doing that? Why am I saying this to this person? We can go through the same criteria the Buddha used of, is it beneficial? Is it true? You know, is it something that will actually help that person in the moment by conveying some level of truth to them? Not that everything has to be dharma that we say to everybody, but it has to have some, grounding in truth, some grounding in something that will be, again, creating more honest connection with others. But I think this idea of is it beneficial? That's a thought that really should be part of that second question. Why am I saying that? Is it really to benefit others? Or am I just saying things to fill the space? Sometimes people are like that, right? There's an awkwardness in silence, and everyone wants to fill it with all sorts of stuff. So we just start saying things, but it's not really that beneficial, a lot of what we say, and it might actually disturb other people's minds. Yeah, there's that other phrase that, again, I saw attributed to the Buddha, but I don't think the Buddha actually said it, which is, don't speak unless you can improve on silence. There's something kind of noble about silence. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with silence, but from our point of view, we should be silent unless we really can improve on that and do something that is worthwhile with what we're saying to others. So again, I think this is one of the better known verses of this text for a good reason, because it is important that we do attend to our speech when we're with others. Now, the second part of it, when you're alone, guard your mind, and be really meticulous in watching your mind. Our minds can go all over the place, especially when we're meditating, right? You sit down to meditate and you do all these kinds of things. There's a little story that Alex shares. I think it was from Alex. I don't think it's from Geshe Ngawang Dargye. Let's go to that. First, there's this little phrase, which I think is kind of a nice one from one of the Kadam masters. Again, that's the whole lineage of teachers that came from Lama Atisha in the years following his arrival in Tibet. When with others, we should be mindful not to harm them by careless remarks. One of the Kadam masters said, we make personal judgments and accusations as if they were all true. I wish there were locks on my mouth and on everyone else's as well. I mean, maybe that's going a little extreme to put locks on our mouth, but it's a bit of that idea of, right, again, don't speak unless you really can improve on the silence by saying something that is useful, and by making judgments of others or accusations or things that are going to be taken in a harmful way, not so good. Then he says here, when alone, we should examine our thoughts. Without the attainment of single-pointed concentration, our mind is like a restless child. And that's the case for most of us, right? We don't have this perfect concentration. Our mind is like a pinball machine. But even before we attain single-pointedness, we should always try to bring our mind back to a state of stable concentration as best as we can. And then it is from Geshe Ngawang Dargye. He says, the story is often told of a merchant who, during his meditation, would think about his business so that he could formulate how to instruct his employees. Whenever he rose from his meditation, however, he would forget what he had devised and want soon to return to his contemplation. But this is not what we should be using our meditation for, right? Making plans during meditation can easily become so habitual that we achieve a certain sense of enjoyment from time spent meditating, but we must avoid such gross mental wandering. So be careful what we do on the cushion. It is good to kind of make sure that that's productive time, that the mind isn't all over the place. It's developing stability, or if we are doing analytical meditation, then it's investigating the topics with some level of stability as well. Now, in James Apple's version, then, that was the tail end of the text, those two verses, two lines that we just went through. He's going to he moved them up, so now we go on to 23. And this is sort of a dedication prayer. Whatever virtues you gather through the 3 times, dedicate them toward the unexcelled great awakening. This is what we do at the end of every class, right? We dedicate our own virtues, what we've attained in that class in particular, to the great enlightenment, all beings attaining enlightenment through our attainment of that state. And then disperse your merit to all sentient beings and utter the peerless aspiration prayers of the 7 limbs at all times. Again, the 7-limb prayer is something most of you are familiar with. I'm not going to go into detail. We're just running out of time tonight. But these are the 7 limbs that we should ideally put in. There is a prayer that does this, where you say, reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I make offerings both actual and imagined, and so on. So there's prostrating, offering, confessing, which is our ritual of having regret for our negative actions and so on, rejoicing in the positive actions that we and others do, supplicating the gurus, the Buddhas and teachers to remain in this world, and then requesting them to teach, to turn the wheel of Dharma. And then finally dedicating, which of course is at the end of all of our practices and certainly at the end of the 7-limb prayer. And then he goes on, the final kind of advice from Lama Atisha: if you proceed thus, doing all these heartfelt dedications and, of course, using the 7-limb prayer and so on, you'll swiftly perfect merit and wisdom. Again, these are the 2 wings of a bird, the 2 essential things we need to have to become a Buddha, and will eliminate the 2 defilements, which are literally the obscurations of afflictions and the subtle obscurations to omniscience. Again, these are the 2 things that we have to remove to become a Buddha. As I mentioned in the meditation tonight, they're what kind of pollutes our minds. Those can be removed. They're removed primarily through wisdom, but you need the accompanying merit. You need that positive potential to help you to do that. Then in the conclusion of this verse, he says, since your human existence will be meaningful, you'll attain the unexcelled enlightenment. That's kind of his closing in the version that James Apple put together. He's like, you'll get there if you make your life meaningful and you act in this way. This concludes the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland, composed by the Indian abbot Dipankara Srijana. That's his full name, and he was known as Lama Atisha. I wanted to give you this little bit of final advice that comes from Geshe Ngawang Dargye because I thought it was really quite sweet. He said the teachings outlined in this text are not solely for Dharma practitioners, but as we've even seen tonight in some of what we discussed, they can help anyone who simply wishes to lead a good life. Whether or not we accept such doctrines as past and future lives, if we act as if they did exist, there will be only benefit for ourselves and others. Again, that Venerable Rabin often says this, right? Just use all the teachings on karma, rebirth, and so on as like a working hypothesis. You just live your life according to that and see how beneficial your life is. We should be friendly towards others, yet at the same time as stubborn as an ox when it comes to maintaining the purity of our practices. Make sure that we don't, again, fall under the sway of those who might take us from our teachings and our practice. There is a Tibetan proverb, wrap the rope from your nose around your head. So what does that mean? Animals who are led by a rope through their nose are forced to follow where others lead them, right? That's how they lead on them often, is with the ring or the rope through their nose, a hole in their nose. However, if this rope is wrapped around their own head, they remain docile and friendly, free to roam where they wish. Which of course doesn't mean that you should go all over the place and do whatever you want. It means that you're in control. You're not following someone else, which again pertains primarily to those who would lead us astray. In a similar manner, if we wrap the rope of ethical discipline around our own head, it is unnecessary to follow some outer imposition of morality. If our discipline comes from within us, we need no external authorities or guides. Again, it's still good to have some spiritual guidance, but if we have good morality, we can be our own compass when it comes to those sorts of things. And I think this is the last one. Dharma practice should not be done as mere ritual, out of obligation, or because it is popular. We should not follow Buddhism because it has a growing reputation or has become a trend, but because we realize its benefits. No matter what practices we do, if they help our mind, they are worthwhile. This in turn helps all others. So again, I hope that it's been useful to go through this text. My own thing too about kind of how to use it from here, because you've got these 26 verses of advice that you can look at, work with. Certainly it's useful if you can to work with them bit by bit. You can recite this text every day. It's not that long, right? You could recite it, or you could even pick a verse and just say, okay, I'm going to start with number 1 or number 2 or whatever, and then you kind of work with that, repeating it, and then trying to focus on it. Or if you look back on these 5 teachings I've given and you say, oh, I really think I need to work on this because that's a problem for me, then you start there and you look at the advice that was given by Lama Atisha and try to incorporate that into your life. But I know we're all getting many Dharma teachings, and many of us have other practices, and we have many things to do. So do your best. I'm not expecting everyone to practice this full text and become enlightened very quickly on the basis of that. We'll all get there. I'm sure we will. But it's important to give yourself a bit of space too. So any comments or questions on tonight or on the whole course? Again,
I'm not gonna look for
What's that?
I'm not gonna look for a MAGA to argue with.
I'm not gonna look for a maggot to argue with Ed. That's good, Ed. Well, I think, again, we have to look at it. Is that gonna be fruitful? I mean, there might be some people, again, you know, of the way things are going, where you might be able to actually have a good conversation with somebody, and we could benefit from more of that kind of talking around the table kind of thing. But there's a lot of people who, again, are gonna be really bullheaded, and maybe we're bullheaded. I mean, that's the thing we have to look at as well, is how set are we and how we think and what we see, and we have to be careful, you know, but that's probably good advice, Ed.
Lama,
Yes.
hi. Hello.
Hi, Adrienne.
Hi. Oh, just from something what you said earlier in the teaching. It's a really good teaching tonight, by the way.
Mhm.
I did Al-Anon for a while, the 12-step program.
Mhm.
And I think the main thing that I gleaned from that was to say, you could be right.
You could be
And
right.
that was something that I learned from, I think that's maybe the one thing that I pulled away from that was that, you know, and I've used it so many times
Right.
over the many years now, you know, so many times when I really felt myself about to get into an argument with somebody over something. And I would just say, you know, and especially with a couple of very difficult people in my life
Uh,
where it keeps coming up, you know, and and whenever I say, you know, you might be right. I don't have to actually say you are right, but I can say you might be right. You could
Yeah.
be, you know, and it just dispels any negative energy right away. And there's nowhere to really go with that from the other side, you know. It it quiets and just kind of peace ensues. It's really interesting how it works. And it makes me feel better.
Sure,
Say
sure.
it, you
That's a
know.
really good phrase. Thanks for sharing that. I like
You
that.
might be right. Yeah.
There was
'Cause it
another,
might be.
you know, Adrienne, you might be right. You are right. It's like, but there was I may have shared this before. There was a friend who I had and I'd met him in Santa Fe, and he had a dog, and he would take the dog to the dog parks, and I guess his dog was a bit frisky, and some people would come up to him to complain about his dog. And so he, rather than like getting into an argument with them, he would always say, "Well, what do you need from me?" And that kind of question of what do you need from me put somebody in a totally different space of,
Yeah.
then they look at it like, well, what am I really trying to get from this conversation? What is it that I really want this guy to do about his dog? And then you can have a conversation about it, right? But if you're just yelling at somebody because of you're upset at whatever's happened, you have to say, well, what do you need from me? Well, what is it that I can do for you?
It's a good one too.
I like that one as well. I share that sometimes because I think oftentimes we feel like we have to get into that I'm right, you're wrong, and then this one's I'm right, you're wrong, and we just keep doing that until one of us gets tired and leaves or something. Uh, yes, Mary Jo.
Had that opportunity with my daughter recently, and it was interesting. I'm the mother. Well, so what?
So
You know?
what?
But,
Yeah,
did you make those, the art design on those booklets? That's nice, those,
with
these,
oh no,
square
no.
geometric designs. Did
Oh
you-
no, no, that's in there. Oh, the ones that are on the slides. Yeah. You mean what I've been sharing here?
What?
Like
Yes,
this? Yeah, no, that's just a PowerPoint design.
oh, I see.
That
Well,
thing?
AI or
Yeah.
something. It's-
No,
it's-
no, no.
it's nice.
They have different
Anyway,
they have different templates.
doesn't have any kind of.
Looks like sugar cubes to me, but
You can look at them.
Mm.
I like them anyway.
So any final comments? Because we should close and do dedications, but if there's anything anyone wanted to add, again, I'm happy to
Do you need me to
entertain
take
that.
one?
So,
I do need a ride.
okay. So again, next week we will be doing Developing the Peaceful Heart, just a one-off talk that I'm basing that on some advice that Joseph Goldstein gave. He's actually more part of the Insight Society than from Tibetan Buddhist point of view, but he shares some Tibetan teachings he had. And so I'm using that kind of 4 points he raises about the peaceful heart, and I'm going to be working with that with all of you. And then we'll go on, as I said, to do a course through the Thursdays in April on working with anger, finding calm in the storm, different techniques for developing patience. So. All right, thank you all for joining. Let's do our dedication prayers. So get those on the screen, and then Jana will be happy to lead us in that. Let me get that up there to the top, and let me go down. There we go. Oh, did you want to recite the dedication list? I'm sorry. So Jana's going to recite the dedication list, and then we'll do the prayers.
We dedicate the merit from this teaching to all beings everywhere on every prayer list, specifically for those experiencing obstacles, Jana, for illness, Jane and Rolf, dedicating for those who are dying, who have died in the last 49 days, Eloise's neighbor, Van, Ingrid, Gaza, Adonio Pacheco, Jefferson.
And could we add Katie Lockwood to
On
the
which,
death list?
Katie
Yes, or Katie Lockwood.
And if there were any more online, you can unmute and add.
Jana, could you please add Matt for obstacles? Thank you.
I have one. You can hear me.
Yes.
Alyssa for obstacles.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, any of those beings on the list whose names we recited, as well as anyone else we're holding in our heart, and all those on all the prayer lists around the world, as Jana said, let's dedicate.
dedication prayers, one time in Tibetan. Gewadi Nyur Da Lama Sangye
Do Chi
Ma John Chu Sem Jogrin Poche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurchi Ke Wanyam Pa Me Payam Gong Ne Gong Du Pelwa Sho. Long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel,
source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
For the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche,
Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for other living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of Bodhisattva, the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Okay, thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. Thank you all for being here tonight and throughout this course, and I'll look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. So have a good week. Practice well.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Don.
much. Thank you for
Thank
the
you,
support.
Don.
Yes, did
Thank
Mary
you.
Jo want to make an announcement or?
No, It's Thursday, our class, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it'll be next Thursday. Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye. Thank you.